One way to ensure a successful job is to perform a detailed site survey before the estimate. Today I will give you 5 tips on how to document a site condition for a better estimate if your estimator or your project manager has asked you to perform one. Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions submitted by installers, project managers, estimators, ICT personnel, and even customers. We're connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this show on YouTube, would you mind hitting the bell button and the subscribe button to be notified when new content is being produced? If you're listening to this on one of the audio podcast platforms such as iTunes, Google, Amazon, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating? And if it's not a 5-star rating, shoot me an email at chuck@letstalkcabling.com so I can figure out what we can do to make this a 5-star show. Because the more people we reach, when we take on that algorithm, the more people we can educate, encourage, and enrich the people in the lives of the ICT industry. Also, make sure to join our live after-hours multi-stream broadcast where you get to have your favorite RCDD, well, that would be me, answer your questions on installation, certification, estimation, project management, and even career path questions. It's held every Thursday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and questions that are submitted early via comments or direct message or even emails, obviously you're going to get a preference. You can send those questions to at questions@letstalkcabling.com. And finally, while we provide this content free of charge, and we always will, if you like to support this channel and you want to have some access to some additional information, make sure you check out the QR code on the screen. And if you are listening to this on an audio platform, you can look us up as well, where you can buy me a cup of coffee. You can schedule a one-on-one 15-minute Zoom call, after hours, of course, or you can also become a Patreon member. And again, all those you'll enjoy additional benefits for being a part of the club. Or you can go to our website and visit our Amazon link page and go to the website and see what products for ICT that we have listed there. And when you buy stuff from that page, you're not going to pay any extra for it, but I do get a small stipend if you do. It's just another way that you can help support the show. One of the biggest complaints that I hear quite often is technicians expressing their dismay as to why don't estimators visit the job site to do a site survey before they do their estimates? Well, the fact of the matter is, your better estimators will. And they'll always visit that site before estimating. So that way they can identify all of the material, all of the labor, all of the site conditions to make sure that they have an accurate estimate to install that job. Sometimes, though, a site survey is just not possible. The building may not be built yet. There may not be enough time before the bid is due to actually go visit the location. The location may be geographically impossible to reach in such time that you can make that estimate. Estimators are not the only people who perform site surveys. At times, a technician or a project foreman, or maybe even an installer, might get sent to capture the site conditions for an estimator or maybe even a project manager. So hopefully some of these 5 tips will help you be better at documenting those site surveys. The first tip I have for you is to be prepared before you visit the site. Now there's 2 areas of concern here. The first one is to ensure that you have all of the equipment to perform a site survey. The first thing you're going to need will be PPE or personal protection equipment. This is going to include a hard hat, maybe high-vis vest, gloves, safety glasses, hard-sole shoes, maybe even a dust mask, especially in our post-COVID environment. You're going to want to document all of your findings, and items to help you be better at documenting all these items is to include, like maybe example, a notepad or a tablet to capture your notes. Now, I've always found it useful as well to take either pictures or video. You would be surprised at the number of times that I missed something and gone back and looked at the pictures or looked at the video and found things in the site survey that made it be more complete. In today's environment with cell phones, pictures and videos are easy to take and as easy to transfer between your phone and the estimator or the project manager who needs that information. You could potentially need other items like a flashlight or a way to measure your runs like a laser distance meter or a measuring wheel. In some environments, you can even count ceiling tiles and come up with that distance. See, most ceiling tiles are either 2 by 2 or 2 by 4. All you would just do is count the tiles that run, and it's a simple math problem to determine what your actual length is. Another method, though not as accurate, is to count your steps. Now, everybody has different stride distances, and you even have different stride distances depending on whether you are walking up a hill, walking down a hill, walking quickly, walking slowly. Each one of those is going to be a different distance. The best thing to do is to know how much area you traverse, okay? Because you might actually have to go over obstacles and stuff. That's going to affect your stride distance as well. So what you want to do is you want to know what your stride distance is before you begin this method. Now, for example, what you might want to do is find some place where you have a known distance. For example, those ceiling tiles, right? If you know that it's exactly 100 feet between two specific tiles, then you can walk that distance and count the number of strides it takes you to cover that distance. And then divide that distance by the number of strides. Now, with this system, though, you may want to build in a little bit extra, fluff in that job site to cover any potential for inaccuracy, because we do sometimes make mistakes. On a personal note, though, if you are asked to visit a site such as a retrofit or an occupied space, make sure that you dress for that job. Now, I don't mean go show up in a collared shirt and a tie, okay? But don't show up in torn jeans. Don't show up in a stained work shirt either. And remember, you are probably one of the first, if not the first, the person that customer is going to interact with your company. And you want to make sure that you make a good impression with that customer, especially if you're the technician who might be actually doing the job if you win this job. Again, dress for the part. The next pre-survey item is to obtain both, if available, a copy of the scope of work and a copy of the prints. Now make sure that you get them with enough time to read through them and digest all the requirements before you visit the site. You might want to even spend an appropriate amount of time with the estimator to review their notes if possible. Remember, the more time you have to prepare for this site survey, the more accurate your site survey is going to be. And again, that's a better chance that your estimate will be correct and you'll have the right amount of material, right amount of labor. There will be some site surveys where you might get asked to perform that are in a less formal type of scenario. For example, you may not be given a scope of work. You might not be given a set of prints. In this scenario, you're going to have to capture all those requirements based on your meeting with the customer. So I hope that you are a good listener and also someone who takes notes, because you will need that. Now, when you arrive at that site ready to execute the job that you were tasked to perform, the second tip is to document your conversation with the customer. The second tip is to capture the critical site access issues that are going to impact your job, right? Capture things like, what are the hours of operation? What time do they open? What time do they close? Will you have access to the site? Is there a freight elevator? Does the freight elevator only work during certain hours? After hours, is it reserved for the cleaning crews? What are some of the parking requirements for work trucks? Sometimes they may make you park in a different part of the building. Is there enough space for storage for your tools, your spools, your job boxes? Is there any safety classes or background checks that the crew is going to have to submit to prior to actually doing the work? Had that a lot for government jobs. Who will be the point of contact for the crew on site? Will that point of contact also be authorized to approve any changes to the scope of work? Will they be able to approve change orders or not? When will be the first date available that the crew can show up and begin their work? What date do they have to be finished by? Are there any employees on the site with handicaps such as sight or hearing or physical disabilities that the crew will need to be made aware of to take steps to ensure their safety? I did a project one time where we took our normal steps to secure our work areas. We put out cones and stuff. But there was a person who was working for the customer who was actually legally blind and walked right into one of our secured work areas and almost caused an accident. And also an accident that would have resulted in an injury to them and an injury to one of my guys. So don't be afraid to ask that question, so that way you can make a go-around plan. The customer will thank you for that. They will thank you that you're paying that close attention to the detail. Another issue that would be appropriate to address is, are there any limitations to loud noises? While hammer drills and powder actuated tools and bandsaws they're common noises found on a new construction site, but in a retrofit type of install, like you're wiring up a lawyer's office, those sounds may not be welcome. And they may require that those portion of work that's going to require those loud tools to be done during non-business hours. Again, you won't know this if you don't ask. Now, if you have a set of prints and a scope of work from your project manager or from your estimator, what you want to do is you want to look at and determine which hallways and other areas that you're going to want to use for your cable pathways. Tip number 3, open up ceiling tiles. Take notes. Take pictures of that interstitial space above the tiles. Note, is there enough room to install your cable? Is there enough room so you can stay away from potential sources of EMI? Is there a building infrastructure that you can attach your support structures to? Is there any fire-rated barriers that you're going to have to penetrate? And if so, how many are there? And what are they constructed of? Is it a drywall with metal framing? Is it drywall with wood framing? Is it a block wall? Is it a solid concrete wall? Because each one of those will need a different type of fire stop, and they all have different prices. Document the height of the ceiling in all the areas where you're going to be performing the work. Now, this may require taller ladders or maybe even some type of personnel lift. Note what kind of ceiling tiles that you will be opening as well. There's several different kinds. So there's a tongue and groove type of ceiling, also known as lock tile ceiling, which may actually require you to break ceiling tiles to be able to get into the ceiling to pull cable. You will have to replace those broken ceiling tiles. If you were not given prints, then there are 2 potential ways to document those floor plans. Most offices have a map on the wall somewhere showing the people who work in that office egress points to be able to get out of the building in case there's a fire. This is actually mandated by the local fire marshal through regulations. Take that off the wall, go take it to a copy machine, make a copy, and put the original one back on the wall. Right? Make sure you replace it back. Now, if there's not one of those prints on the wall, then you literally are going to have to draw a layout on a blank piece of paper, or maybe several pieces of paper. The latter option will not be to scale, so make sure that you document the distances of the hallways, the sizes of the rooms, with the width and the length, right? Make sure you document that all on your drawings. Remember, pro tip number 1 from my list of 146 pro tips is document, document, and document. You can find that list on my website. If you're not given a set of drawings with all the locations, then you and the customer are going to have to walk around to show you where all those drops are going to be located and mark those on your prints. Also, make sure you note, is it one voice and one data, one voice, two datas, two voice, two datas? Is it Cat 5e, Cat 6, Cat 6a? Or placing Post-it notes on the wall where every one of those drops will go was a common practice, but if you were there to capture the information to create a bid, the customer may not want you to put those Post-it notes on the wall, and they're going to be there for a long period of time. And that's assuming that you win the project. You may not win the project. So Post-it notes may not necessarily be the best during the site survey. Plus, I found that Post-it notes always have a way of falling off the wall, being moved by office personnel, or just plain disappearing. It is best to just document them on the prints that you have either created or that you have made from that fire escape plan. Pro tip number 4. Now you will want to see the room where you can be placing the horizontal cross connect, the racks, the 110 blocks, the BIX blocks, if it may be. Now you and the customer will have to explore all of these options. Now first determine, is there an existing one or will you be building out a new one? Document where that room is on your prints, and if it's an existing horizontal cross connect in a telecom room somewhere, then you want to make sure that you determine that there's enough wall space for any of your wall-mounted hardware, like your 66 blocks, 110 blocks, Bix blocks, even wall-mounted racks or cabinets. That seems to be a big thing nowadays, is mounting the big cabinets on the walls. If you are going to mount a wall cabinet on the plywood, make sure that that plywood is installed in a manner that will support all of that weight. Also, is there an existing pathway to get from the wall to where the frame is going to be? For example, like ladder rack, cable tray, basket tray, or you're going to have to install J-hooks. You're going to route that cable over to the termination field. Is how you can be able to get it there. Can you use existing fire stops, or will you need to be able to install new ones? Make sure that you take plenty of pictures in this room, because remember, you won't remember everything. Check to make sure that A, is there a backbone? B, is it multi-mode? Is it single mode? And is it copper? If it's copper, how many pairs is it? And is there enough to support all these new drops that the customer wants to put in? If you're putting in a new telecom room, make sure to try to place it in the middle of the area that it's going to serve. Avoid using things like storage closets, janitor closets, and even restrooms. I've seen telecom rooms only accessible by going through restrooms, and I saw one of them, you had to go through the women's restroom to access the telecom room, right? So sometimes that may not be the best. Note that this type of walkthrough, how much plywood will be needed to be installed. What kind of wall are you attaching this plywood to? For example, is it a drywall? Is it block? Is it solid concrete? Because each one of those is a different termination method. Ensure that there is no water or sprinkler pipes passing through that room. Make sure they're not using it as a storage room. Will there be access to adequate ventilation to get the hot air out of the room? Is there enough lighting? There should be 500 lux, or about 46-foot candles of light measured at 1 meter above the finished floor, or 3.28 feet. Are the lighting fixtures in that room a minimum of 8.5 feet above the finished floor? Because remember, you're going to be putting in a 7-foot rack, and then you got a ladder rack or cable tray to get over there. Are the walls currently painted in a light color finish? If not, they're going to need to be. Nothing is worse than trying to terminate a cable in poor lighting conditions, because sometimes the orange and the browns get really close to each other. Are there any electrical receptacles in this room? If so, how many are there? Document their locations. And if you're able to, try to determine if they are dedicated or if they're wired through a light switch, because you don't want to have your servers connected to an electrical receptacle that goes through a light switch. Tip number 5. Once you've documented everything, sit down with the customer and review everything that you identified during that site survey, especially the drop locations, especially the counts, especially what type of cable they want. And also ask if there's a requirement for coloring. And if you're not using a formal set of drawings, this will also help you ensure that you and the customer are on the same page and avoid potential problems later while you're running this job. Tip number 6. I know I told you I was only going to have 5, but you know what? Here's a bonus one. Tip number 6. Have the customer sign and date your drawing after you both agree that everything's there and documented. That will be the basis for the work that's going to be performed and for which the contract language is going to be written for, which includes the assumptions and the terms and conditions. And one final thing before we close out this episode. Make sure to leave the site in better condition than you found it. If you opened it, close it. If you moved it, put it back. If you dirtied it, clean it up. And here's tip number 7. Here's another freebie. Make sure that if anything that you documented in your own handwriting, that it's legible. And make sure that you organize all that information into a file folder. And then when you make it back to the office, make a backup copy for your records. That way, if anything happen to get lost and they ask you for information, you can actually go and give them another copy from what you have. Review your findings with the estimator and or the project manager, whoever has asked you to do this work for you. Bring them up to speed on what you found. That way, if your company is awarded the project and you happen to be the lucky one assigned to this project, you're already one leg up on the details of this project. That's going to help you mobilize quicker. That's going to help you probably finish the project quicker, under budget, and maybe even on time. Again, the more information, the quicker, the more accurate that estimate's going to be. So I hope this helped you, and if you have any additional tips to help someone perform a site survey that I have not covered in this short little episode, make sure you put that in the comments below so that we can all learn. Until next time, remember, knowledge is power.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.